National Australian Pavilion. We extend our thanks also to the numerous universities and partners from throughout our region and beyond that have been involved in this special event, including the University of New South Wales, Arizona State University, the National University of Singapore, University of Oxford, Victoria University of Wellington, and the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program. First, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations peoples of the lands you may be joining us from, and I extend my warmest welcome to our Indigenous guests in attendance today. Now, this event came about because it's widely recognised, as you all know, that climate action can't be achieved by one institution, one discipline, one country, or one sector alone. Solutions are born from partnerships that cross traditional boundaries, and unprecedented global and cross-sector cooperation is going to be required to create the societal transformations necessary to keep 1.5 alive, or at the very least to limit warming within 2 degrees. With the first global stock take on the Paris Agreement in mind, today we want to discuss the important role that universities can play to accelerate meaningful partnerships for the goals in alignment with SDG 17. Universities have a role to play in creating public good, and part of this is really about fostering diverse partnerships to work hand in hand with communities and train the next generation of professionals to create climate solutions. Now, this special event enables you to explore the importance of real-world partnerships with governments, not-for-profits, the private sector, and local communities. And you'll gain insights from prominent leaders and experts in the tertiary sector as they share their valuable experiences and stories of fostering mutually beneficial partnerships. Now, how will today run? The format of today's event will be a conversation with distinguished leaders to articulate the sort of state of play of partnerships in the Asia-Pacific region. So we're going to explore strategic priorities, the landscape, and ask the question, really, what are the opportunities for partnerships in our region that can help us respond to climate change and its impacts? Now, as part of today's discussion, we'll also draw on the reflections and ideas that were discussed during an online symposium on this very same topic on November 2. And that symposium was grounded in storytelling and focused on sharing stories and case studies from the Asia-Pacific. And participants at that symposium were given the opportunity to reflect upon the same questions we're going to tackle today. And their responses are actually going to be displayed on the screen today, just as a little bit of context and to really bring a greater diversity of voices into today's discussion. So let's bring the focus back onto the wonderful panellists gathered in the room today. I'm really honoured to be joined by the fabulous people sitting before you. And as we go through today, please keep in mind we'll have an opportunity for your questions at the end of the session. So first, who am I? I'm Associate Professor Susie Ho, and I'm the Director of the Monash Innovation Guarantee at Monash University in Melbourne. And I will kindly ask our wonderful panellists to introduce themselves when I send a question your way. So first, we might start with you, Inji. In your own words, first it would be great if you could introduce yourself, and then in your words, what does a successful climate partnership look like? Can you give us an example from your work context and give us a bit of insight into what you think the foundational elements of an authentic, mutually beneficial climate partnership are? So I'll hand over to you, Inji. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Susie, and thank you for having me here. It's a great honour. So kia ora koutou, everyone. My name is Inji. I'm a New Zealander that was formerly based at Victoria University of Wellington, where I did my PhD, and now I'm based at the University of Oxford as an early career researcher at the Oxford Sustainable Finance Group and Oxford Net Zero. And so throughout my career, I've always kind of been really at the intersection between academia and non-governmental organisations and government. And I think that kind of that background has really helped inform to kind of see the potential for different kind of climate partnerships and how they come into play. So really, I mean, today I also want to give some examples of what climate partnerships could look like, and also to give you an idea about some different scales that they operate on, and also different time scales. And so, so one great example, which was run by Oxford Net Zero this year, was the youth climate training. And so this was a global youth training for hundreds of global youth from all around the world. It was 13 sessions ran by experts, live translations, and everything like that, really to build out the capacity of global youth so that when they come into spaces like COP, that they are informed, they have the background, and they're able to engage on the same terms as the negotiators and the rest of their countries. And so that was really exciting, but that's large scale, that's a lot of youth and a lot of kind of activism and energy. But then, there's also the different form of partnerships between both NGOs and then researchers. So an example of this is the Early Career Scholars for an Inclusive Stocktake group that I was part of this year. So that informed the Independent Global Stocktake. And so that's a partnership between universities and NGOs, and that's focused on really trying to give an independent estimate of the state of play towards the Paris Agreement, and crucially where we could go to next. And so I was part of the early career aspect of that, which was 12 scholars from 5 different continents collaborating on different research projects to really inform the goals of the Global Stocktake. And my research focused on climate finance and equity within that space. And it's really interesting because we zoomed in on identifying the inequities within integrated assessment models, particularly within the energy sector. And then this week we've heard that be brought up in the GST room and that discussion. But what was so powerful about the collaboration, both between the different scholars and coming from different countries, and so my group, we were all from different parts of Asia Pacific, was that when we're talking about these thorny issues of climate change and climate finance, is that actually having a wide range of views helps break down some of the misconceptions that happen on both sides of the coin in terms of research, and actually be able to provide truly independent and rigorous research back to the decision makers who are making these decisions in venues such as this. And then lastly, I wanted to give an example from just a few days ago. So I follow the Article 6 carbon market negotiations here, and this week we saw a revival of a proposed methodology called 10-year accounting that had been resoundingly criticized, by academics, even project developers, as being kind of unscientific and unrigorous to contribute back to NDC goals. And just to indicate that these kind of partnerships can form really organically and very quickly, but as soon as that issue came out and was made apparent, really there was an effort between researchers who are not here, but the experts in 10-year accounting, to provide their latest insights, some of which are papers that only went live last month, directly to the negotiators in the room to help provide them with robust and independent analysis on why it is so dangerous to go ahead with that. And it looks like so far that's been taken off the table. So it's really important to have these kind of mechanisms. And so I guess to summarize with those 3 examples, what makes them successful is I think they come together with a shared vision. They have a defined purpose and a defined outcome, but they're also brought together on trust. So particularly the latter 2 examples, when you've got researchers working on a project on a really contentious issue of climate finance from both the global north and global south, you have to have real trust there that the methodologies that you're using, the data sources that you're using are not biasing your results and trying to kind of come to a foregone conclusion. And especially when you're advising the negotiators, it's also really incredibly powerful when you can show that it is a diversity of voices that are informing your opinion, that it's not just one person, that it's not just an opinion, that it's actually science. And so, I think that's why these examples have proven so effective, and that they provide some useful lessons for future partnerships. So thank you.
Wonderful, Inji. Thank you so much for that response and those wonderful concrete examples, very timely examples indeed. Now I'd like to throw to Ben with quite a big question, Ben. And I'm shifting now our discussion more towards higher education specifically. What role do you think universities can and should play as a partner in the Asia Pacific, you know, as a hub for partnerships with business, civil society organisations, young people and communities more broadly?
Thanks, Susie. A very big question. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this panel. My name's Ben Newell. I'm a professor of psychology and behavioural science at UNSW Sydney, and I'm also the director of a new institute at UNSW, the Institute for Climate Risk and Response. And I think that institute in itself is an example of how partnerships can start to develop. So if you think about the importance of partnerships that universities can offer, the university, first of all, has to figure out what it has to offer and how it can integrate across the different types of expertise that it has. And so with the Institute for Climate Risk and Response, what we've done is brought together academics from the faculties of science, faculty of business, and the faculty of law and justice, all focusing on climate risk, but bringing their different types of expertise to that big problem. So we've got people who are experts in the physical risks of climate. They understand what the models are telling us. They understand the science. And what we're trying to do is create environments where we can translate that science by bringing in people who are experts on the business side of things, from climate accounting, from climate economics, and then also from my perspective, from the behavioural science, how do we translate that into the decisions that companies, that governments really need to make. So I think that's a first step, is getting the university in itself positioned to make that offering and start to be able to reach out to interested parties. If you then go broader and you think about partnerships across universities, then I think the International Universities Climate Alliance, who are sponsoring this event, co-organising this event, is an excellent example of how we find out outside the walls of the universities what other institutions around the world are doing, and especially in our own region. So as a former chair of the Oceania Committee for IUCA, for the Climate Alliance, it completely opened my eyes to the sorts of different projects and the opportunities that were out there for doing this kind of work. And there's a whole range of different types of things that I think we can do as universities that we offer that is unique. First of all, I think we have that objectivity. We are able to provide expertise, we're able to provide advice without having vested interests, without having kind of skin in the game. And I think that's really important in being at the COP and seeing the diversity of projects, of opinions, of science, of voices, of things that are going on. It's exactly what you're saying, Susie, that you need to bring so many different people in order to understand and make progress. And I think having that those different divisions across the university is really important. So from the perspective of the institute where I'm working, we're trying to make connections with industries like the insurance industry, the banking industry, talking to them about, well, what are the projects that they need input on? What are the things that they need to understand in order to start to be able to utilise the science, in order to be able to start to adapt, to mitigate? And so those kinds of conversations that you're having with industry, but also with people from the other disciplines that you work with. So Inji was just talking about integrated assessment models. So having conversations in the room where you have a climate scientist, an economist, a behavioural scientist, and people from industry talking about those types of models and what you mean by the different concepts that are in those and how that then applies to action is invaluable, but it's something that doesn't come about unless you get those partnerships in place. I think once you then go beyond the institutions and the alliances of universities, then we have to think about, well, what are the projects where we're really offering? One from UNSW, not from my institute, but another project that we heard about in a session in the Moana Pavilion just a few days ago is one involving Professor Ian McGill, who's in the Faculty of Engineering, on a project where they're helping Vanuatu transition to renewable energy and think about what are the impacts on their electricity grid, what are the steps that they're going to have to take, how do they model the changes that the grid is going to have to uptake. And that's something which is clearly where you're bringing university expertise, you're taking it to a concrete physical problem out there in the regions, and creating those synergies. And I think, again, having that expertise on hand, having that range of people, whether it's a research project, whether it's an education project, all of these things can come together through these kinds of conversations. And I think it's easy to be cynical about some of the things that are going on here, but at the same time, there is genuine value in having these discussions and having people realize what their needs are and what people can offer them.
Yeah, I really resonate with that last point that you made. Thank you so much, Ben. That's wonderful. We might now turn the discussion to wonderful Fred, who joins us from SPREP and can sort of share the perspective of engaging with universities from the other side, if you will. So Fred, from your experience, what are the existing and new opportunities that universities should be seizing to partner with local, regional or international organisations to contribute to climate empowerment in our area? Thanks, Fred, and thank you so much for introducing yourself as well.
Thank you. So my name is Fred Pattison. I'm the Climate Finance Advisor at SPREP. I am here for our manager. At SPREP, there is the Pacific Climate Change Center, and the Pacific Climate Change Center has 4 key focus areas. One is on innovation, capacity building, research, science to services, and knowledge progress. Now, the work we do, SPREP is owned by countries. We are an intergovernmental entity owned by 21 countries and metropolitan members as well, like Australia and New Zealand. I think from our experience, the entry point for academic research is really in science to service around research, but also in the area of capacity building. And we've got a couple of partnerships that we are already implementing. Through the Pacific Climate Change Center, though, we have developed what we call a partnership framework for science to services. And that partnership framework is meant to bring for example, a lot of the IPCC data and science to inform our policymakers on the basic and the fundamental science of climate change, based on the recent IPCC reports, so that it will inform their decision-making processes. So it is linked, our science to service function is also linked to knowledge brokerage in that sense. We also are engaged on the capacity building front with a couple of universities. For example, with the University of Melbourne, we have about 16 fellows that are now in Melbourne on a 6 weeks fellowship program. So they run through a whole program that was in partnership with DFAT and also University of Melbourne. We had an ongoing, SPREP have an ongoing partnership with CSIRO. They have been providing a lot of research and development of tools and methodologies on one of our projects in Vanuatu. It's a GCF project. We are hosting with the University of Victoria and the University of Samoa, Samoa National University, a climate change conference in May next year as well. So we have quite an experience in this space. I think and we have so many MOUs, and it's almost like when you say partnership, it's a memorandum of understanding. But I think what we need to think about is how to translate those partnerships into tangible outcomes and outputs, addressing the needs of the countries, but also the needs of the constituencies that needs the research and the science the most. I think that is where we probably should really invest a lot of time in. Let me give you a very good example is, I think you were talking about the climate finance space, because we really don't have a good data on climate financial flows for the specific countries in the region, for example. So when we are in these negotiations, when we're talking about the new quantified goal, we cannot set a baseline. Where do we start? 100 billion is probably not enough. Now they're talking about 2 trillion. So the lack of data, it is really is an issue of lack of data. So that is just on the climate finance space. So those are the kind of things that I think researchers could invest in to help inform. I think if you, for us in the Pacific, we want to bring data to country specific and aggregate that into the region. The other area that I wanted to speak of, sorry, I will stop soon, is actually on localized science. Because the IPCC data is based on published materials. And all of you academics, this is your space, you know. If it's not published, it's not true. So I think we need to probably do a lot of synthesis of project reports and make them into published material to inform the realities of small island developing states. I see, because I design projects, and every time we wanted to design a project, we are stuck in the climate rationale for a particular location, for example, or a particular sector. For example, in the agriculture sector around maybe cocoa or around fisheries, for example. So the data is not yet as much specific for us to be able to quantify the nature of impacts from climate change. It is all perceptional now. Oh, the sea level rise is rising in this area. We are using IPCC data based on projections from different models, but so I think for the region, I think there's so much space for everybody to invest in site-based, geographic-specific, and sector-specific areas. I will stop here, but yeah, I think the opportunity for collaboration with regional agencies like ours is huge. We have a lot of collaborations. A lot of them are working well. A lot of them are not working well. So one of the things that I wanted to emphasize before I hand it over to the next speaker is, if you go into a collaboration, it is important that both partners have a clear idea of what the vision and the purpose and the expected outcome and outputs are into the work plan and activities. Because a lot of times our MOUs are aspirational because we say maybe we will do it or maybe we will not do it, and maybe attach resource as well to those partnerships. Thank you. I will stop here.
Thank you, Fred, for those fantastic insights about the needs, the opportunities, and the need for clarity and direction when you're forming these partnerships, which I think we can all, I'm seeing a lot of nods in the audience there, so thank you for those fabulous insights. To our wonderful audience, I'll just remind you to start thinking about some questions to bring to us in a moment, so have those at the back of your mind. And Melissa, I might turn to you now, and I'd love to hear from your perspective, you know, coming from a university, what you think are sort of the operational and institutional enablers and the barriers for us when we're starting to form these complex partnerships in climate action. And it'd be great if you could introduce yourself as well. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you so much, Susie, for this wonderful panel. I'm writing down a lot of notes because this is so great. But by way of introduction, my name is Melissa. I work at the National University of Singapore in a center called the Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions. But I've actually been with NUS for a long time, around 13 years. I used to be in the energy policy space before moving over last April. And when I moved over to the Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions, our director, Professor Koh Lian Pin, asked me if I would take over or start a team looking at continuing education. So this is the lifelong learning part of the university that I think everywhere across the region, across the world, people are starting to put resources into lifelong learning. So it's not just undergrads and graduates that you train. So that's a bandwidth issue as well that I'll talk about. So I wanted to talk about a couple of partnerships because I lead the continuing education and training team at our center while I'm trying to do a PhD. I'm a part-time student at NUS in the geography department. So I always say I do 2 full-time jobs because I work in the day and at night at 9 o'clock I start again, like with my research. So it's madness, and I think that's one of the biggest barriers because there are not many people who can or who want to go into academia, at least in Singapore. So then you find like there's a dearth of people in sustainability that can do that range of things and can form partnerships. So I think one thing that was a good enabler for some of the partnerships that our center and our university has been able to do is because some of us have been there for a long time and we've built trust and rapport with government agencies in Singapore. And so there's at least a couple of continuing education trainings that I wanted to mention. So the first partnership that we have is with the National Climate Change Secretariat in Singapore, and that's based under the Prime Minister's office, so that's quite high level. And we always talk about capacity building in a way that it's like, oh, we need to train industry, we need to train civil society or whoever, but actually the Singapore government needs training. And so they came to the National University of Singapore, and we have a training program called Sustainability 101. And we signed an MOU with them, and basically what happened was in the past year, we've trained 200 government officials in Singapore alone. And they come from all over, all agencies were involved. They paid us money for the course as well, so the universities made money, which is really important in order to get buy-in from the very top. Yeah. So if you want to engage in these programs, you're going to make sure that the university is supportive, and one of the ways, obviously, to show them that it's profitable. Right? And you can only do that if they believe in you, if they, being the government of the country, believes in your programming. And so I think they did put a lot of trust in us, and that obviously is built up over time, right? 13 years to be exact, in our case. The second partnership that I want to talk about is one that actually really fell on our laps. So this partnership was for a blue carbon capacity building training that our university, the National University of Singapore, was effectively asked to organize. So it's one of those requests that you can't turn down. And you guys know what I'm talking about, right? So they tell you, do you want to do it? But actually it's like, please do it, or you have to. So we ran this blue carbon workshop in Singapore, I think within 6 weeks of being asked to do it. And it involved ASEAN countries, so the Association, Southeast Asian countries, as well as Pacific AOSIS countries. And so within 6 weeks, we had to do the whole programming, inviting people to Singapore, book the hotels and everything. And this was because Singapore had signed an agreement with the UK. It's called the Singapore-UK Green Economy Framework. And they wanted to really tackle the low-hanging fruit, right, which is capacity building. But what they didn't realize was that a lot of the university was essentially expected to put up speakers and experts on our own dime. Right? So we had to pay for our speakers' time. Actually, in fact, we ended up not paying people. We just said, we can't pay you. So basically, the governments that were involved offered to pay for the flights of participants and their hotels and the meeting rooms, but not for people who are offering the content. So that's a major barrier, I think, so recognizing that sometimes, but of course the profits that we made from Sustainability 101 helped to get us through. But the reality is that there's so much juggling that you have to do, buy-in. So a lot of the burden actually falls on content providers, especially you really want to get impact. You really want to, I really like science to service, right? And we want to do that. But funding is a major issue, especially for being able to provide the content, making sure that sustainability content is valued at the right level as well. The other thing I want to talk to is researchers don't like giving talks. At least the ones that I know, they're very focused on their research, and because many of them on the tenure clock, yes. So they've got 6 years to produce papers, they've got to teach. And quite often, actually, in the National University of Singapore, this is the case. Executive education doesn't count towards their teaching load. So it's all extra. If they want to do executive education, they have to take time out of their own schedules. So researchers are not particularly socially engaged because they have obligations to the university. And I think this is actually a systemic issue. The way the universities hire, they look at your H index, they look at the impact that you've made on academia, and less so on your service to the community. But I think that absolutely needs to change. And telling these stories at platforms like these, I think, will get the kind of traction that we need to move things along. So I'll pause then, and we can carry on with the conversation.
Oh, fantastic, Melissa. And I think I saw a lot of nods when you were talking about the traditional ways that we measure academic success and the need to change those and to focus on the impact that we're having, or recognise at least the impact that we're having in society, as well as, you know, our Q1 publications. Absolutely. Fantastic discussion here today. What I'd like to do now is just pause and invite some comments or questions for our fantastic audience. And we have a question over here, so I'm going to run across. I'll be right back. Thank you so much.
Hi, Anke Leroux from Monash University. It really, sorry, I missed your name.
Melissa.
Melissa. The different incentives that researchers face when they want to interact really rings a bell. And I think in Australia, at least, there's now a big push towards impact of your research and showing real impact rather than, you know, just having a piece in the newspaper or something. And I think that's something where, for us researchers, it would be really helpful if there was a feedback loop created to see how our research really impacts on the ground 5 years, 10 years down the track. So it's basically a project doesn't stop when it's finished, but we can somehow follow up on what that has, you know, the follow-on from the research we provided. That would help us to show impact as well.
We'll invite the comments from...
Yeah. Just very quickly, thanks so much for that. You know, so for the National University of Singapore, this is our 10th year being accredited to the UNFCCC. And we've really had to be really patient. This year was also the first year that we managed to get our university president to come to COP. And I think he really, well, we asked him whether he would come back, and he said, only if necessary. But that doesn't speak to the fact that he saw the impact. He did see the impact, and he congratulated us for the panels that we were putting up at the Singapore Pavilion and everywhere else that we were taking him to for 3 days. But I think, I mean, the reality is in Singapore, the same thing is happening. The current Minister for Education in Singapore, his last portfolio was the Ministry of Trade and Industry. And so that really helped to drive the continuing education bid, right? So he pushed a lot of the money that was going to master's degrees and PhDs onto lifelong learning. Of course, some people are not very happy about that. Some departments especially have now had to cut subsidies for academic programs. But obviously it's good for people like me who have taken on the continuing education teams. But the reality is that it takes time, I think, for hiring to change and for the thinking to change. Because a lot of people in the university, you know, that's the life that they know, research, publications, traditional forms of service. But I think it's a brand new world. The challenges are so complex that I think impact is something we're struggling, we're working on how to showcase impact as well. So happy to have an exchange on how you guys are doing in Australia.
Fantastic. And I think, Ben, you've got some points.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that comment, because I agree that this is something which I think a lot of institutions are struggling with. And I know that where I work at UNSW Sydney, there's actually a big engagement process going on now with faculty, with staff, to actually map out what impact looks like. What does impact across lots of different dimensions actually look like, and how do we measure it? And I think that's the important part of the question, right? Is how do we actually measure this impact in ways that are incentivized and comparable? But the other thing that I do want to bring out, I think, is that at its heart, I think a university is also about knowledge creation. It is about driving fundamental research. It is about, I mean, in the context of all of the science that we're hearing about here at the conference, that's come from university fundamental research. So it sometimes, I think we have to get that balance between acknowledging that, yes, we have to think more about the impact of our research beyond the publications and the citations. But that's a fundamental part of it as well. We have to have that evidence behind us before we can go out and do these kinds of engagements, before we can actually have situations of science to service, as Fred was talking about. That needs to be funded fundamentally, and then we need to think about research. But as you know, directing an interdisciplinary institute is something that I'm facing in a very concrete way, because recruiting academics at a junior level who want to do that interdisciplinary work is difficult because of the fact that you have to go outside your interdisciplinary silo. And I think, if you're in a discipline where there's only 5 journals that count when you go up for promotion, and you're doing work that sits outside that, or you're doing work that takes you out of your, if you're doing the executive education but it's not part of your workload model, et cetera, then that becomes difficult to map into. So I think things are changing, and I think there's a recognition of it, but we also don't want to lose sight of the fact that you don't get the impact unless you do the fundamental research in the first place.
Such good points. And I'll just add, I think we're going to be forced along in this journey by our students. So in the Monash context, our undergrads, our masters and our PhDs are wanting to have that translational impact, and they're looking to us to find that model and to build their capacity. So that's fantastic. We have another question. Thank you.
I'm from Tonga. This is my first COP, and I'm a new member of parliament, and I think I'm here to listen. I think one of the issues that some countries face is that people who are in responsible positions are not climate literate. And your point about bringing in the people from the public service and agencies to be trained, I think it's a key issue because, as we all know, universities are a totally different setting from the industry or the public. And I think I've heard some countries, I think in Africa or the Caribbean, that they are starting to offer, and I think some of the international agencies, not the universities, are starting to offer diplomas and even degrees on some aspects of climate change. But what I've noticed, in countries like mine, very small, and there's no research facilities, they have to rely on other international agencies for information and training. It's going to become a problem, an issue. For us to be climate literate in Parliament is significant. I am in the opposition. I'm not in government, so that I can play effectively my role to scrutinize government on what they are doing about climate change. And I think it's a message that should go around countries, that the two streams will have to come closer together. The research facilities in universities and the science will somehow in the future begin to drift together rather than in their own lanes. But I think I take your point about the training to bring people who are not even climate literate in responsible positions, let alone those people who are out in the community who don't even know what is the science, what is the policy, and they don't know that. But efforts like this, listening to Singapore has the facilities, but countries like Tonga in the Pacific, I think Fiji is starting to offer some courses. But I think if the effort is spread around as much as possible for climate awareness, I think it's going to make a lot of difference in the next decade or so.
Yeah, I'd really love to respond to that very quickly. So Sustainability 101 for policy officers was requested by the National Climate Change Secretariat of Singapore. And then several other government agencies heard about it, and we had a request from our first ever ministry that asked for a specific leadership level training. So we did a Sustainability 101 at the leadership level. So instead of 5 days, it was 2.5 days. And do you want to make a guess which ministry requested for that leadership training? It just blows my mind also. It was the Ministry of Defense in Singapore. And they paid quite a lot of money because it was a very short runway, and we charged them more money because they have the budget also. But it was interesting to me because the permanent secretary himself, which is effectively, one below the minister, right? So the permanent secretary requested for sustainability training because Singapore has announced net zero by 2050, and the Ministry of Defense has got to get on board. Absolutely, it's got to get on board because nobody knows what their emissions are like, but we know it's high. So he requested for all his, I had to train the Chief of Defense and Chief of Army about the Paris Agreement. And then I was told, oh, don't worry, you're a civilian, you're the highest ranking person in the room. But it was very stressful, but I'm glad we did it. So I think it's important that people in government service, in public service, recognize the importance of sustainability training. We had a lot to do in 2.5 days. And it was helpful also to hear from MINDEF, Ministry of Defense, that they want it to be recurring. Because people move, right? The portfolios change, and so they've asked us to consider, running regularly enough so that when new people come into the roles, they can also come in for the training. To your point about capacity, Singapore runs this program called the Singapore Cooperation Program, and every year we put out calls for colleagues from around the world to come to Singapore. It's fully paid for, as I understand, to come to Singapore. This is obviously in lieu of climate finance, because we don't give climate finance. So what we do is technical training. So I'm happy to send you some links, and you can, and also share, maybe we can exchange contacts, and when those courses come out, across the university in Singapore, we offer those courses for the Singapore government. Very welcome for you to share that with your colleagues and apply to join the programs. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Fred, yes, we'd love to hear from SPREP.
Yeah, thank you. Imagine if the Singaporean government are asking for information on climate change. You can imagine us in the Pacific, Honorable Member of Parliament. But we have some initiatives in the region. The Pacific Climate Change Center, we have an existing partnership with the Parliament of Tonga. The Speaker of the Tongan Parliament is here. We brought him here for that purpose because we got a request on the need for parliamentarians to understand climate change. Effectively, they make law. So you would want them to be able to understand the context and the basics of what climate change, and of course, the international obligations under the UNFCCC and related conventions. So we have a partnership with the Parliament of Tonga since February this year, it's not yet. And we've had trainings delivered for them, and also we are able to partner with the Commonwealth Parliamentarians Program. We wanted to extend that into the region. But I think relevant to these discussions, the entry point for you academics is the technical expertise that for us as the Pacific Climate Change Center, we could draw on and link. We see ourselves as the conduit to connect the researchers and academics to the needs of the Pacific. So the Pacific Climate Change Center, in that case, is pivotal because that is our role is knowledge brokerage and capacity building, and I'm glad the Honourable Member from Tonga is here to be able to reflect on that. We also have an ongoing training across different thematic areas. We have trained over 6,000 Pacific Island, all of them government officials throughout the region. We were doing the training during COVID-19. I mentioned we have about over 15 fellows who are in Melbourne now. I mentioned it earlier. But they are actually from our previous training. They are alumni from our previous training on climate change and health. So we are building on that. So they are now in Melbourne. We wanted to, one of the things that the Pacific Climate Change Center and also through SPREP wanted to do is to sort of to be the interface between the researchers and the practitioners. So a lot of the solutions to different climate impacts are probably out there, maybe in the industry or maybe with the researchers. So we wanted to be a conduit to bring them together and then provide the service aspect to it, to the people that needs the most, especially the Pacific Island countries who we serve. So I think I wanted to reflect on that point as well. We are talking to a couple of universities, but one of the things we wanted to do is to create a roster of experts that we could draw on. Because we are doing a lot of trainings in climate finance, on health, climate change is in most of the sectors now. So we want to be able to have a roster of experts, and maybe through partnerships approach, we have the capacity build, our research partnership framework that we want to capitalize on and implement. So we're already implementing that. We have an ongoing discussion with the Solomon Island National University, focusing on traditional knowledge. We are calling that concept, I just get out of my head, but something around knowledge laboratories, traditional knowledge laboratories. So those are the kind of examples of how the Pacific Climate Change Center and SPREP is looking to use the partnership framework to deliver the work that we do. So yeah, I'll stop here.
Fantastic. This has been an incredible discussion, lots of diverse perspectives, and what I've gathered here from today is there is a lot of opportunity for partnerships and a lot of fantastic people acting as pioneers in this space as well, including all of you. So thank you so much. Just to close out this session, I would love to hear just from each of our panelists briefly to close up. What do you think is one big opportunity in the partnership space that excites you, either for your institution or your region? Ben, we might start with you and put you on the spot.
Okay, I think just continuing the conversation about education opportunities and lifelong education opportunities, one of the reasons that we set up the UNSW Institute for Climate Risk and Response was because of the conversations that we were having with industry about the need for a climate literacy, climate 101, whatever the term that you think of. There's a huge expansion across industry in the number of people whose job titles include the words climate and sustainability, but their level of understanding of the science, the legal implications, the behavioural science implications of how our human behaviour is going to have to change rapidly over the next decades is limited. And I think that is a massive opportunity for not just in Australia but in the region as well, to think about, well, what are the kind of courses? And we're actually actively going out at the moment and surveying our kind of membership and our interest, people that are connected to the Institute, to find out what types of education do people need. Because I've heard a lot at the conference about the importance of climate education and climate literacy, but at what level do people need to know things? How much do you need to know about the basics of the carbon cycle in your particular job position? And I think that there's a massive range of options out there, but I see that as a huge opportunity to start to think about the scaling of those different types of courses and the breadth of knowledge that universities have and depth of knowledge that universities have to create those kinds of courses.
Thank you so much, Ben. Fred, how about you?
Yeah, I'll be very short, but maybe just applicable to our region. I think one of the opportunities that we should capitalize on is to try and understand context. Yeah? And research should focus on context, and I think partnership is critical in terms, one of the things that I think a huge opportunity would be to explore how we could co-design and co-develop solutions. Yeah? With the people that are living within a specific area. And for the Pacific, we are indigenous people, and some of the knowledge systems that we have are not the full solution, but could be part of the solution. And so the opportunities is for us to understand that and research that and develop them into long-term resilience solutions to address climate change.
Very important point. Thank you. Inji.
Great, thank you, Susie. I'd just like to, I guess, summarize by kind of tying together some of the themes in the room in terms of, one aspect that hasn't been mentioned is this science policy interface, but I was really grateful for the comment from the honourable member from Tonga, because I think it raises this really valuable opportunity, and I wanted to bring it back to some tangible examples of what that could look like in the COP space. So, the first one is that several governments host stakeholder briefings, where you get to have a real dialogue with up-to-date information about what's happening in the negotiation rooms, and that's also the time to ask these kind of critical questions and to be able to distill where is the difference between a position held for science, for example, and one that is kind of government policy, and then the ways to operate within that space. And then I'd also wanted to highlight this great resource that's just come out. So it's an updated version of a negotiated guidebook. It's about, I think, 200 pages long, but it covers, everything from the basics of climate science right through to what happens in the negotiation rooms. And one really interesting theme that's in there that wasn't in the first one, produced quite a few years ago, is actually the value of bringing in NGOs, academics, as part of the party delegation. A few of us here are on party overflow, so that's even a step towards that. But it's kind of having that expertise on hand to be able to help support delegations when in these crucial kind of negotiations, particularly at the final stages when it has gone up back to that political level where there's some really big things being traded and on the line. And the last one is, I think we've talked a lot about the opportunity for training being delivered by universities. But I also wanted to pick up on the colleague from Monash's point about it's the feedback loop. So we also need to be hearing from you guys what's important in terms of being able to deliver the research. And what's really interesting in the conversations on the stream I'm following, Article 6, is we're trying to figure out not only what research is useful now, but what will be needed in 2 or 3 years' time, because we have to think in those kind of cycles to be able to produce the information that can ultimately be relied on to help inform its operationalization. So, just wanted to wrap with that, but thank you.
Amazing. Melissa, to close us out.
Yeah, thanks. There were so many things that resonated with me, and in particular, I want to take it back to Sustainability 101, and I think why that program is, at least for me, seems to be successful, and we're hopefully going to be renewing the MOU with the National Climate Change Secretariat for next year, because every time we run a program, we do an after-action review, and it takes 2 hours to go through every single speaker and whether they were impactful on that program or not, and if not, why were they not impactful? And quite often it's because the science doesn't quite translate to policymakers and what they're interested in. So we take 2 hours, like the government agencies, National Climate Change Secretariat and the Ministry of Sustainability and Environment, we sit down for 2 hours within 2 weeks of the program. We go through our survey documents and we make sure that we improve for the next cycle. So I think that feedback that Inji talked about is so important, and context-specific as well that Fred talked about is so important. But you mentioned, you've asked us this question about what is the huge opportunity. I think mentorship and looking at our younger colleagues especially, they need a lot of guidance. I don't know if any of you have hired Gen Z colleagues. They need a lot of time, a lot of guidance, and I think sometimes we do get frustrated, but that's also the biggest opportunity for us to showcase our passion for what we do, and hopefully that rubs off on them, and they also see this, and they also can rise up to the challenges. Students also, I think a huge opportunity for universities will be to groom the next generation of academic leaders within the university, within government, civil society, and I think that's where universities can really play a very important role. So I think mentorship, having the patience for our Gen Z, Zillennial colleagues, I think is really important. And I read a lot of self-help books to just try and understand their work ethic. I don't know if any of you feel the same way, but it's so important. And we brought 10 students. I know you've probably brought students here as well. And they just need so much time, like to gather all of that. And we had to spend time to brief them and debrief them, and constantly on the loop with them, because we want them to take this work forward. I mean, I need them to take this work forward so I can sit back and finish my PhD. So I think that's the reality for all of us. We're just doing multiple jobs, wearing multiple hats, and it's just so great to see and hear that everyone kind of faces similar challenges, but I think if we partner together, I think we can overcome those challenges.
And that's a wonderful point to end on. So please join me in thanking our esteemed panel today. I hope you'll agree that was a very enriching discussion. Please feel free to stay around and chat in the foyer. And to close, our thanks to the National Australian Pavilion for hosting this wonderful event. Have a wonderful day.